If you talk to somebody from Europe about football, once you get past that initial barrier of, no, I'm talking about American football, you may more often than not get the jokes of why is it called football when almost no one uses their foot to kick the ball. And the first thing we're going to do is tell them about the wonderful and beautiful world of special teams. And almost immediately, for those who don't totally check out because they're bored of the sport, you will see that Europeans' eyes light up, watching this play and realizing that, hey, this is something in a foreign sport that I could actually do and probably be pretty decent at. But when this conversation was happening around 60 years ago, they would have had a much different reaction. Something more akin to, why are you guys doing that wrong? But one thing I noticed a lot of guys are doing wrong is self-grooming and self-care. Just going out looking scraggly and scruffy. So that's why I'm glad to tell you about today's sponsor, Manscaped. Now, I've been using Manscaped products for my personal care for a little bit now, but they have busted out just an absolute game changer. It is called the Chairman Plus. Not only is it going to get you a super clean shave in just minutes, but it has 2 interchangeable blade heads to get you that smooth skin close shave and the ability to customize your look. It also has Flex Adjust technology, so it adapts to your face to get those hard to reach spots. And do you hate getting nicked by razors? Well, guess what? It also has skin safe technology to significantly reduce cuts, razor burns, and ingrown hairs. And is looking good in a timely manner simply not enough for you? Well, I'll do you one better. It's also waterproof, so keeping it clean is a completely non-issue. Whether you're looking for a gift for a man in your life or something for yourself, you literally cannot go wrong with the Chairman Plus. And for the piece de resistance, if you go to manscaped.com and use promo code IsaacPuns, you can get 20% off and free international shipping. You heard that right. Isaac Punts get you 20% off and free shipping. So ditch your old shaving routine and get with Manscaped. But yeah, if you watched Americans kick in the 60s, it may be the most foreign part of the sport. It's also why, in my opinion, there's no darker era of American football than, dare I say, the toe bashing era. Now, at first glance, there are some things that make sense about the toe kick. Like you get to line up directly in line with your target, your leg swing gets to stay towards your target, and assuming you hit the right spot on the ball with the right part of your foot, I mean, shoot, it's gonna fly that direction. However, there is a pretty large downside that can be summed up with one tiny little fact, and it's that the front of your foot is not flat. That little point at the front means it cuts down your margin of error by just unfathomable amounts, even when you include the fact that they tried to flatten the front of the shoes out back in the day. The movement already doesn't have a large margin of error, and that made it that much harder. This led to kickers being just wildly inconsistent to a degree that a lot of times it wasn't even worth it to have a guy whose sole job was to kick. Hence why many of the early day big names for kickers in the sport were guys like Lou Groza, who was setting records while predominantly playing left tackle. But regardless, through the 50s, kicking was pretty stagnant. The average throughout the years was constantly fluctuating between the mid 40% to low 50% make percentage, and that was honestly good for the sport when you think about it. You see, the initial design of the game was meant for teams to score touchdowns, with field goals honestly being tertiary in design as a last-ditch effort to get points when absolute need be, with them being wildly inconsistent, risking the field position that they had gained and only worth 3 points. Field goal attempts were pretty low during these days, as many teams just didn't see it being worth the risk. And while attempts and the percentages were slowly trending upward, there was one European man who dared ask the question, why are you guys kicking the ball wrong? And that was a man named Fred Bednarski, a man of Polish descent who was attending the University of Texas and would later go on to kick the first ever soccer-style kick in an American football game. And while he never went to the national stage, that kicking style was the initial ripple that shook the core of football to the point that when a young Hungarian man by the name of Pete Gogolak came over to the US and saw people kicking and asked himself the same question, he would send his film to teams, and instead of there being tons of questions about his style and people not knowing what was up with it, the remnants of Bednarski and the scouting done on him out of college were still lingering in the air, and suddenly a new style was born. The NFL was finally adopting a soccer-style kicker. But there was just one little problem. there were no soccer-style kickers in America at the time. Now, part of it was that soccer was just not a particularly popular sport in the States, but by the time the second kicker broke into the league by Jan Strenard, American coaches quickly began to realize that having this style of kicker was no longer something they could go without, leading to there being an influx of not just soccer-style kickers, but imported soccer-style kickers from Europe and honestly all over the globe too after that. And the effect it had on the game was something that nobody expected. Football got worse for the first time since its inception. Now you might think, as a special teams enjoyer, there would be no way having more kicks in the game could be bad. There did come a problem once your kickers could make these long kicks with relative ease, and that's that the risk of continuing a drive suddenly doesn't outweigh the reward of playing it safe and kicking a field goal. And through the mid-60s and early 70s, we felt that to an extreme. Teams, instead of going for touchdowns, were consistently stalling barely on the opposite side of the 50-yard line, since the goalposts were sitting on the front of the goal line, meaning that they'd easily accept a 40-yard field goal attempt. But in 72, the NFL would inadvertently make this worse in an attempt to give offenses a boost by moving the hash marks to being in line with the goalposts, which was the nail in the coffin. Kicking field goals suddenly became easier than ever, and passing with those long fields, since the hash marks got moved in, became harder, compounding the issue building up to this point. So by 1974, the NFL had to take drastic measures. They moved the goalpost to the back of the end zone. They made it so missing a field goal would be more detrimental by getting the ball back to the opposing team where it was kicked from instead of being a touchback, and even moved the kickoff line back to the 35, only further hurting what was left of the homegrown American toe-bashing kickers, leading to 1977, where half of the kicking crew in the NFL were not just soccer style, but imported from other countries, as scouts, coaches, and GMs alike were all looking abroad for the next Gogolak or Strenard, where they would find guys like Ray Wershing from Austria, Gero Yepremian from Cyprus, Rafael Septian from Mexico. I mean, American football had officially gone global in the kicking arms race, with frustration from traditional American players and coaches growing with the problem of too many field goals, as it was famously quoted that the only way to stop the problem with the NFL having so many field goal attempts would be to tighten immigration laws. Since then, the indomitable American spirit, though, won. We didn't let Europeans just come in and steal our jobs forever, as by the late 80s, almost all kickers were back to being American born and bred. But the lingering effects of soccer-style kicking are still being felt to this day. How many times do you hear about talking heads speak on limiting the amount of field goals being kicked, or getting rid of the field goal altogether? Who here remembers when the NFL tested narrowing the goalposts in a Pro Bowl to potentially implement that at a later time? And other compounding variables, such as the fact that you can get so much more consistent power out of this kick, that means that yes, while the field goal is a problem in and of itself, it also completely made the kickoff irrelevant compared to what it used to be, due to the pure leg strength of guys like Bradley Pinion, who came into the league in 2015 and has an almost 80% touchback percentage. So now they're scrambling to change the kickoff to try to make it relevant again, while also juggling the fact that it's a dangerous play, where in my opinion, if kickers weren't so good at getting touchbacks, they'd probably never touch it at all, because there's nothing safer than a play simply not happening because everything's getting kicked out the back of the end zone. But the fact that it took us about 70 years before we had a European come over and question why we were kicking the ball in probably the dumbest way possible, and having that little revelation breaking the game in so many ways that nobody expected. But the least talked about part of all of this one little thing that I hinted at earlier that really was the spark to make it all happen, was US immigration law. That's right, baby. You see, you may wonder why and how we were bringing over so many imports, and it was due to both of the world wars increasing and encouraging more immigration in the US. Notably, after World War I, we had the Immigration Act of 1924, which set up quotas for how many immigrants we were taking and from where they would get preferential treatment from. But we doubled down on that in the 1950s after World War II with the McCarran-Walter Act, which honestly is a pretty complicated law, but one of the fallouts is that we were able to control more so where we were taking immigrants from, with further focus on taking Europeans from North Europe, with Bernardsky hailing from Poland and many great kickers coming from Norway. And with how resistant to making that change many American kickers were at the time, it took almost 2 decades from the first soccer style kick before Americans were truly adapting it. I think it's pretty safe to say that globalization and lax immigration policy truly is what ended up breaking American football.